So we just learned that divorce is relatively common, right? So that's often very discouraging. And so a lot of students often ask me, what can I do to prevent divorce? John Gottman is a psychologist who looked at, what kinds of behaviors are common in couples who eventually get divorced. So he had something called a love lab where he invited couples to come into the lab and be videotaped. And often he would have couples do like a activity together or pick some kind of contentious topic, what's your biggest conflict that you have with your partner, and talk for 15 minutes about that topic. And he analyzed the interaction styles and between these two partners during that discussion of the contentious topic. Then he followed up these couples about 3 to 6 years later, and he wanted to see were these couples still married or were they divorced? And so he could use his analysis to predict whether they actually got divorced later. And he actually found a lot of accuracy with his results. Based on whether they showed certain behaviors, he could predict whether they got divorced 3 to 6 years later. So this caused a lot of attention because of how accurate he was able to predict divorce. So he identified four horsemen of the apocalypse, or four kinds of behaviors that he noticed and that were linked with being more likely to get divorced later on. One was criticism. So if during that discussion somebody attacked the personality or the character of the person, like if they said, "Oh, you're so selfish," you only care about yourself, or if they made a generalization, you always are selfish, you always just do what you want to do, then that would predict a divorce more often. So that's criticism, attacking the personality or character of someone and generalizing their behavior to their overall character. He also noticed that if there were defensive behaviors, that also predicted divorce. Defensiveness meant pointing the finger at somebody else versus yourself. It's your fault that the kids don't behave. It's not my fault. I disciplined them well. It's not taking responsibility for what you did. So, maybe you cheated on your partner. You might say, well, I only did that because you weren't spending time with me and you weren't paying attention to me. That would be not taking responsibility. Dismissing what other people say. So if one partner said, you spend too much time at work, and the other partner said, well, you're judging that well. You don't know what it means to be like a hard worker or to be really involved with your job. That's dismissive. And it also includes picking on past actions of others. So not being in the moment, but saying, well, you did this, 10 years ago, you also did this thing to me. And so bringing up the past is also part of defensiveness. So any of those kinds of behaviors also predicted divorce. Stonewalling was also a big one. And actually, that was the biggest predictor of divorce, especially if husbands did stonewalling in heterosexual relationships. So stonewalling means just tuning the other person out, kind of turning off, ignoring the other person, or being very cold to them, giving them the silent treatment, or just acting like you don't care. Uh, any of those kinds of behaviors predicted divorce, especially when husbands did that during the conversation. And finally, he also identified contempt. So if he saw that kind of condescending emotion, the use of sarcasm, name calling, if there was eye rolling going on, then that also would predict divorce because contempt is like looking down on somebody in like a negative way. So people have looked at contempt in the facial expressions, which I thought was interesting. You can actually identify contempt by having like active muscles around the nose. Your eyes can actually be relaxed compared to if you're angry. It could be limited to one side of the face, so there's a feeling of imbalance to the facial expression. Lowered eyebrows and a raised upper lip. You can also have a combination of smiling contempt, right? It's a very complex emotion and a complex facial expression. and the prototype of contempt, Simon from American Idol.